Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Michael Reyes. I'm 32. I live just outside Tucson, Arizona, in a rented adobe duplex near the Santa Cruz River, working as a field engineer for Raytheon. Most of my days were spent troubleshooting radar systems, sometimes flying out to Yuma or White Sands for tests. Long hours, decent pay, no family tying me down. Just me, my German Shepherd Coda, and the desert horizon. I didn't think the end of the world would start on a Wednesday. The first I heard of anything strange was a 4 a.m. emergency alert on my phone, a loud, jarring tone that startled me and Coda awake. I reached for it groggily, eyes half shut. CDC advisory, unusual viral behavior reported in select regions. Stay indoors, await further instruction. I stared at it for a long moment. No location specified, no explanation. Just that cold, impersonal alert tone and the spinning wheel of uncertainty. I checked the news. Nothing. Twitter had a few clips from Los Angeles and Juarez showing chaotic scenes. People screaming, running, something about attacks in hospital ERs, low-res footage. A woman in a nurse's scrubs covered in blood trying to barricade a doorway. Her voice cracked as she shouted something in Spanish. No se mueren bien. No mueren. They don't die right. Then the clip cut. That's when I felt the first ripple of fear. By sunrise, the local news caught on. KGUN 9 in Tucson broke into regular programming with emergency updates. Unconfirmed reports of erratic behavior, possible viral hallucinations, and attacks across Pima and Maricopa counties. They didn't say the word everyone was starting to whisper online. Infected. At 8:35 a.m., Raytheon cancelled all field operations indefinitely. Essential personnel only. Defense contractor protocols now in effect. I got an automated call and a duplicate email marked urgent. Remain off-site, secure property, inventory all issued equipment and maintain radio silence unless otherwise instructed. The language felt like wartime readiness, not corporate boilerplate. Still, I tried to convince myself it was just panic. Maybe a new drug on the streets. Synthetic cathinones, bath salts. They'd caused similar incidents before. That was the engineer in me, trying to categorize unknowns with past data. But then Coda started growling at the window. At first, I thought it was a neighbor's kid playing in the wash behind the house. I walked out, calling for Coda to heel, but he wouldn't budge from the front window. His ears were flat, eyes locked. Then I saw them, 3 people stumbling across the gravel path behind my yard, heads low, backs twitching like they were dragging invisible weights. 2 men and a woman, torn clothes, skin pale and grey despite the rising heat. And they weren't walking, they were drifting, unsteady, almost drunken movements, but too purposeful to be random. I backed inside, locked the door. By 10 a.m., Tucson was in full panic. I-10 heading north was gridlocked, and helicopters hovered low over the city. A friend of mine, Caleb Alvarez, texted me from Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. Bro, they just locked us in. All comms sealed. They're not telling us shh. I tried to respond, but the message bounced. 5 minutes later, my phone signal dropped to 1 bar, then nothing. I turned on the ham radio kit I'd built last year, Yaesu FT891. Hooked to a roof-mounted antenna. I scanned through the frequencies, nothing but static, until I hit 14.076 megahertz, a burst of automated digital signal noise. Then, repeat, unidentified aerial phenomena entering lower mesosphere, origin unknown. NORAD advises all secure facilities to initiate blackout. I froze. The voice was clipped, military, East Coast accent. It faded into static before I could record it. Unidentified aerial phenomena. That's what they call UFOs now. But the timing, on this day, while people were tearing each other apart in hospital corridors, something didn't feel coincidental. By nightfall, the city skyline had gone dark. I stood on the roof of my duplex, staring out over the valley. The lights of Tucson, usually a steady glow against the mountains, were patchy, flickering, or gone entirely. I heard occasional screams carried on the wind, gunshots, sirens. I had stocked some supplies, MREs from a field test, a few gallons of water, a solar power bank, but I hadn't been a prepper. That was never my thing. Now I wished I'd listened to the guy at the surplus store who tried to sell me iodine tablets and a Geiger counter. Just before midnight, the sky changed. It began as a low-frequency hum, like standing next to a transformer. Coda whimpered, pressing himself against my leg. Then the sky to the west, out past Saguaro National Park, lit up with a piercing blue beam, vertical, reaching up into the heavens, and something came down. At first, it looked like a meteor, streaking fast and bright, leaving a trail of ionized particles. But it didn't fall. It slowed mid-descent, then shifted direction. It hovered, silhouetted by its own faint glow. It resembled a humanoid frame, broad-shouldered, metallic, gliding on some unseen force. Its chest plate pulsed a soft white blue. No wings, no rotors, just raw gravity-defying presence. I ducked instinctively, but I watched. It landed on top of the old Tucson Electric Power Building downtown, crunching steel, sparks flying. Then it stood up. 2 more followed. That was the first time I saw them, what the world would later call the Iron Men. Not suits, not drones. They were piloted, but not by anyone we could reach. And they didn't speak. They didn't signal. They just observed. For nearly an hour, they stood in place, while chaos unfolded below them. I watched through binoculars. From the top of a nearby overpass, a crowd of people, injured, some limping, surged toward the tech building. The Iron Men didn't react until the crowd got too close. Then they moved. It wasn't cinematic. No slow wind-up, no warnings. One raised its arm and projected a white-hot burst of light, silent but lethal. The front ranks of the infected, because they were infected, I could see it now, dropped instantly, their bodies blackened where the light touched. The Iron Man moved forward with clinical efficiency, reducing the crowd to ash and embers in under 90 seconds. Then it returned to its perch. No celebration, no recognition, just precise extermination. I barely slept that night. I lay on the floor with my rifle across my chest, an old M1A I'd inherited from my dad. Not ideal for close quarters, but it felt better than nothing. Coda stayed close, ears twitching at every outside noise. The next morning, I tried to find other survivors. I drove east toward the University of Arizona campus. The streets were choked with debris, abandoned cars, and overturned transit buses. Smoke rose from multiple rooftops. That's where I found Alyssa. She was crouched behind a tipped-over food truck on 6th Street, holding a collapsible baton and a flare gun. Early 20s, wearing a University of Arizona sweatshirt. Dirt streaked across her cheek. "Don't move," she shouted when I approached. I held my hands up. "Name's Mike, not infected, just looking for others." She didn't lower the weapon for a long time. Eventually, Coda emerged from behind my truck and sniffed the air. She relaxed slightly. "That your dog?" "Yeah, good judge of character." She nodded once, slowly. "I'm Alyssa, biochem student. I was at the lab when it started. I've seen what they become." I helped her load into my truck and we headed back west, avoiding the freeway. Along the way, she told me the university lab had been quarantined by unknown personnel in unmarked vehicles. Black SUVs, no license plates. One of her professors, Dr. Imani, had theorized the virus wasn't terrestrial, that it had spliced proteins not native to Earth's microbial evolution. She said the professor vanished the same night the Iron Men appeared. Back at my place, we rigged a defense, barricaded windows with plywood and furniture. We shared water and food, talked little. The news was gone. Cell towers were still down. All we had was the ham radio and static-filled frequencies. Then, on day 4, A new signal broke through. Human survivors. Coordinates confirmed. Safe zone established at Kit Peak Observatory. Repeat. Kit Peak is secure. Iron units have cleared the perimeter. The voice was male, mid-40s by the sound of it. Professional, but not military. There was no sign-off, no formal call sign. Just that message on loop, transmitted every 3 minutes. I stared at the Yasu rig as the words repeated, while Alyssa sat cross-legged on the floor beside the dog, her hands loosely gripping the baton she'd carried since the university. Kit Peak was a 2-hour drive under normal conditions, 6,875 feet up in the Quinlan Mountains. A perfect location for an observatory and for a defensible stronghold. But between us and that ridgeline lay 56 miles of semi-abandoned highways, choke points, and infected zones. What concerned me more was the wording, cleared by iron units, not secured by survivors, not operated by military personnel, cleared. We spent the night discussing the logistics of the trip in whispered tones. Drawing on a paper map of southern Arizona I had tucked behind the toolbox, I ruled out the main highway, AZ-86, too exposed, too likely to have blockages or infected migration paths. Alyssa suggested a southern route, take Mission Road down through the Tohono O'odham lands and cut back northwest on Bureau of Indian Affairs Route 19, which climbed through sparsely populated foothills toward the observatory's access road. It was more remote, but less likely to be swarming. By dawn on day 5, we had packed everything that could fit into the back of my 2009 Toyota Tacoma. Gasoline was topped off using 2 5-gallon jerry cans I'd siphoned from a disabled police cruiser near Grant Road 2 nights prior. Food was tight, 8 MREs, a tub of peanut butter, half a case of canned beans. Water was the real constraint. We had just under 6 gallons between us. That wouldn't last long if we had to ditch the truck or got stranded. I handed Alyssa my backup sidearm, a Glock 19 I used for range practice, loaded with 9mm hollow points. She checked the chamber with professional ease, which didn't surprise me. She'd mentioned once that her father had been Army Reserve. I packed the M1A across the rear seat along with a scoped Mini 14. Neither of us knew what we'd face on the road, but we both knew it wouldn't be just the infected. We rolled out just after 6 a.m., Coda in the back seat, head pressed against the glass. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty streets. Tucson had turned to ash and silence. Burned-out sedans lined Speedway Boulevard. A Pima County ambulance lay on its side near the intersection of South Park, its doors open and cab empty. No bodies, just blood smears and flies. I kept the truck under 30 miles per hour to preserve fuel and maneuverability. Every few blocks, we passed something that made us tighten our grip. An abandoned barricade, a dog barking from a rooftop, the glint of binoculars from a second-story window. I didn't stop to investigate. We were done with heroics. The outskirts were worse. Past Drexel Heights, near the San Xavier district, we spotted our first real hazard, a crumpled tour bus halfway into the ditch, its side pocked with black scorch marks. Around it, 6 bodies in various states of decomposition, limbs bent at unnatural angles, eyes missing. What concerned me most wasn't the gore. It was that their clothing still looked fresh. That meant they hadn't been dead long. And if the Iron Men were vaporizing infected downtown, what had killed these ones? Alyssa took note of a smear pattern in the gravel nearby, crouching briefly to examine it, while I kept lookout with the rifle. Whatever did this moved fast. The drag trail goes past the fence line. We didn't follow it. By midday, the desert heat pressed down like a lid. Shimmering on the asphalt, we drove in silence, passing the occasional empty home or radio tower, always on edge. It wasn't until we crossed into reservation land near Menage's Dam that we heard the first sound of aircraft. A faint sonic boom echoed across the flatlands. I stopped the truck and got out, shielding my eyes. Above us, something streaked westward, sleek, angular, too small to be a jet, too silent for a drone. It had no wings. Its shape resembled the Iron Men we'd seen in Tucson, but this one was in motion, ascending rapidly, trailing faint pulses of light behind it like phased exhaust. It curved high above Kit Peak and disappeared into the blue. Not a machine we built. Not one I recognized from any DARPA or DoD project I'd worked adjacent to. "What are they doing up there?" Alyssa murmured, watching it vanish. "Studying us? Hunting infected?" "If they're here for the infected," I said, "they showed up late." We didn't talk much after that. Near the edge of cells, the road narrowed and the first real sign of survivors appeared. A sandbag checkpoint with a wrecked pickup turned sideways. Homemade signs painted in white said, "Turn back. Quarantine ahead." Nobody manned it. Just crows and dried blood. We were about to drive around when Coda started growling again. I shut the engine. Movement flickered through the brush ahead. Figures, 3 of them, slowly moving past a cluster of mesquite trees. I raised the binoculars, infected. Their skin was dry and split, faces blistered by sun exposure. But what struck me was their posture. Slumped, limp arms, but fast. They moved with broken rhythm, almost like drunk sprinters, stumbling and surging in uneven bursts. And then they stopped. All 3 turned simultaneously toward the sound of the truck. We didn't wait to find out if they'd charge. Alyssa fired first, the 9mm cracking the silence. She hit one square in the neck. It spun, staggered, and got back up. I followed with a shot from the Mini 14, the heavier round snapping through the first infected's skull and dropping it flat. The other 2 bolted forward, shrieking with inhuman voices. It was like something deep inside had taken over the scream, a vibration that felt more synthetic than biological. We dropped both before they could close the distance. Even from yards away, their breath was wrong. It sounded wet and metallic, like ventilators running dry. "Something's changed," I said quietly as I reloaded. Alyssa nodded. "They're not just sick, they're adapting." We pushed forward, more alert now. The road twisted through the edge of the Quinlan's, the terrain growing rockier, elevation climbing. Around mile marker 39, we saw it. An Iron Man unit standing perfectly still on the shoulder of the road. We slowed. I nearly stopped. Its armor was smooth and unmarked, a dull bronze hue that reflected little sunlight. No visible joints, no seams, like it had been poured from a mold. About 7 feet tall, humanoid in shape but bulkier at the shoulders. Its head resembled a smooth dome, with a vertical slit where eyes should have been, but there was no light inside. It didn't move as we passed. Alyssa stared at it. "Do you think it's guarding something? Or waiting?" I said. "Maybe it's not even active." But as we moved beyond it, I looked back. Its head had turned, just slightly, tracking us. We reached the base of the Kit Peak access road just before dusk. The mountain rose sharply ahead, the observatory dome silhouetted against the setting sun. The signal was stronger here, no longer cutting out. We could hear voices now, conversations, radio chatter, someone giving instructions about water rations. Human, grounded, familiar. We crept forward up the winding switchbacks, headlights off. Near the final bend, a barricade came into view, real military grade with jersey barriers, sandbags, and a mounted Browning M2. 2 armed figures emerged as we approached. One raised a fist, the universal signal to halt. I rolled down the window and shouted, "We're clean, coming from Tucson, got food, water, and a working comms rig." They approached cautiously. One was a woman in desert fatigues with a shoulder patch marked USSF, United States Space Force. That caught me off guard. "You the ones transmitting from here?" I asked. She nodded. "Dr. Benson's running the signal. Observatory's under joint civilian-military quarantine. You'll be briefed once inside." "What about the Iron Men?" Alyssa asked, stepping out with her hands visible. The woman looked up at the domes. "They're not attacking us, not yet, but they're not protecting us either. It's like we're in their lab." We were waved through. Coda leapt from the back seat and sniffed the air, ears perked. Inside the perimeter, the mountain plateau had been transformed. Sandbagged tents, solar arrays, even a makeshift field hospital. At least 60 survivors milled about. Many of them armed civilians or out-of-uniform specialists, engineers, medics, a few families, and overlooking it all, 2 Iron Men perched on opposite ridgelines like silent sentinels. They didn't move. They hadn't since we arrived, but every person in the camp avoided looking at them directly for too long, as if afraid that simple attention might provoke something. I watched one young woman, a radio technician with a weather-beaten face, shuffle out of a tent and glance up at one of them. Her entire body stiffened, and she muttered a quiet word in Spanish before stepping back under the canopy of camouflage netting that shaded the camp's central corridor. Alyssa and I were brought into an orientation tent immediately after arrival. A man named Dr. Ira Benson ran the briefings. He looked like the kind of physicist who spent too much of his career in windowless observatories. Hollow cheeks, wireframe glasses, sunburned neck, and the kind of voice that always sounded 2 octaves too quiet for an emergency. He had once managed the data analytics lab inside the Nicholas U. Mayall telescope building, the tallest dome atop the mountain. Now, he was acting as a kind of scientific liaison for what remained of the US government, though the way he said it, what's left of them, gave me pause. According to him, Kitt Peak's altitude and its pre-existing research infrastructure made it an ideal location for long-range surveillance and signal interception. But what they hadn't expected was the observatory becoming a focal point of interest for the Iron Men. He claimed they didn't attack, didn't speak, didn't respond to hails. But within 72 hours of the outbreak reaching critical mass across Arizona, 2 of them had arrived, descending from the upper atmosphere just before the first group of infected were detected climbing the lower foothills. They eliminated the infected with precision and terrifying force. Bodies were burned, not torn apart. No mess, no feeding behavior, no human emotion. Then they simply waited. Dr. Benson believed the Iron Men were not Earth origin technologies, not Chinese, not Russian, not any kind of aerospace program that had leaked out through the usual military-industrial pipeline. He had run diagnostics on the frequencies that spiked when they hovered above the domes. Something was interfering with the observatory's lower UHF band, but not jamming. More like communicating, not to us, through us. That's when he showed us the logs. In a dim corner of the orientation tent, lit only by a red-tinted work lamp and the low hum of a generator, Dr. Benson scrolled through a terminal connected to a patched-together analysis stack. The software had been reconfigured from SETI Institute open-source code, the kind designed to search for repeating non-terrestrial signals from deep space. They had captured something during the first night of the global outbreak, a short burst, a narrow beam, UHF frequency with embedded carrier tones. It was transmitting upward from Earth, not down. Benson pointed at the waveform. We weren't receiving, we were responding. Over the next several days, we worked to earn our place. Alyssa was quickly absorbed into the biochemistry tent, helping a group led by a CDC field analyst named Dr. Javed Reza. He had made it out of Phoenix just hours before the quarantine lines collapsed and brought with him several hard drives containing autopsy data on early-stage infected. His findings were disturbing. The virus, if that's what it even was, didn't behave like anything we'd seen before. Reza called it X37, an unofficial label based on the hex structure of the main protein helix. Its mutation rate was off the charts. Within 12 hours of exposure, the virus migrated to the brainstem, bypassing standard immune pathways. Neural degradation followed, but so did something else: synaptic reconstruction. It was as if the virus was rewiring the host brain into a transmitter, not just for locomotion or aggression, but for emitting something. Electrical, magnetic, they weren't yet sure. Alyssa found this revelation horrifying, but also confirming. They're not just infected, she told me one night by the campfire. They're pulsing, sending something out. I asked her if she thought it was meant for the Iron Men. She looked up at the ridgeline where one of the tall bronze figures still stood, motionless. "Maybe not meant for them," she said, "but maybe they heard it." I spent my time reinforcing the perimeter. My background in field systems and structural troubleshooting made me useful to the logistics crew. I worked alongside a former Army Corps engineer named Janet Croft, who'd helped convert part of the observatory into a temporary comms array. She had been with an Army rapid response unit that got wiped out near Sierra Vista during a failed attempt to secure a local water treatment plant. Only she and 2 others made it out. She didn't talk about it much. Instead, she focused on repurposing generator parts and running mesh cable up the mountain face to boost the camp's relay strength. One evening, while I helped her reroute a backup solar inverter, we both heard a sound neither of us could explain. A low, oscillating tone, barely audible, not mechanical, not natural either. It seemed to vibrate in our bones more than in our ears. We stopped what we were doing and turned toward the western slope. The Iron Man on the ridgeline had moved, only slightly, perhaps 15 degrees of head rotation, but the shift was unmistakable. Its gaze was now focused directly toward the main telescope dome. The vibration continued for another 7 seconds, then cut. Janet looked at me with narrowed eyes. "They're sinking to something." I asked her what she meant. She stared at the dome. "They're not reacting, they're adjusting." 2 nights later, something changed again. A small convoy of survivors arrived from Nogales, escorted by a National Guard unit. They had been trying to evacuate through the border, but found it sealed, not by the Mexican government, but by Iron Men, 3 of them, standing across the bridge into Sonora. They did not permit anyone to cross. Instead, when one vehicle attempted to break through, the Iron Men leveled the structure. No warning, no hesitation. Among the survivors was a man named Luis Velasquez, a technician who had worked at the National Solar Observatory in Sunspot, New Mexico. He was quiet, older, but when he heard what we'd found in the signal logs, he asked to speak with Dr. Benson privately. The next day, Benson called a closed meeting with 6 people. I was among them, along with Alyssa, Dr. Reza, Janet, and 2 others from the comms array. Inside the dome, he showed us a new file, something Luis had carried on a USB stick hidden inside a belt buckle. It was a classified document marked with an NSF cryptographic seal and dated 5 years earlier. The title chilled me. Project Echo Flare, Detection of Structured Energy Emissions from Post-Geological Substrates Below Earth's Crust. It was, essentially, a black project, initiated after a deep solar neutrino anomaly had intersected with unexplained seismic echoes from under the Basin and Range Province, right here in the southwest. The theory? That some form of dormant infrastructure lay beneath parts of the North American plate, not man-made. The National Solar Observatory had picked up strange electromagnetic waveforms rising during solar flare activity, and someone had noticed a pattern. The echo flare hypothesis wasn't about aliens arriving. It was about something already here waking up. Benson's voice trembled as he translated the document's final entry, which had been flagged by NSA technical advisors. The burst detected days before the outbreak, narrow UHF, triangulated across multiple observatories, wasn't just a response signal. It was a ping. Something had received it from below the crust. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat outside the dome with Coda beside me, listening to the wind scrape across the mountain rock. The Iron Men remained still, but their posture was different now, more poised. One had lowered its arms. The other had shifted weight to one leg. Tiny things, subtle movements, but clear if you watched long enough. Alyssa joined me after a while, her arms wrapped in a fleece jacket. "Do you think they're preparing for something?" she asked. I didn't answer. I didn't know. All I knew was that we were caught in the middle of something far older and far larger than a virus. And just before dawn, everything changed again. The sky lit up with an arc of light, Horizontal, not vertical, cutting from west to east, like a satellite deorbiting, but impossibly fast. A few seconds later, we heard the impact. Deep, subterranean. It didn't hit above ground. Everything on the mountaintop trembled. A low-frequency vibration that rattled steel supports and stirred dust from the seams of the old observatory's concrete foundation. A series of aftershocks followed, subtle but unnerving, like a giant underground piston had fired once, paused, then slowly started to reset. Within minutes, everyone in the Kit Peak camp was outside. Soldiers, scientists, civilians, standing in silence, watching the ridgelines. The Iron Men were no longer still. One by one, they began descending from their perches, moving with an eerie synchronicity down toward the central plateau. They didn't walk like people. Their strides were fluid but mechanical, as if their motion didn't require joints or balance. Gravity itself seemed to bend slightly around them, like their mass wasn't entirely connected to the earth beneath them. By the time they reached the outer perimeter, weapons were drawn. The guards positioned at the main sandbag choke points leveled rifles and gave hesitant commands, but no one fired. Not yet. There were 6 Iron Men now, 2 more than had originally been seen. No announcement had been made of their arrival. They had simply appeared. Whether they had landed silently under cover of night or materialized some other way, no one knew, and that was the most terrifying part. They operated outside our rules. Dr. Benson arrived moments later, shouting to lower weapons. "Stand down! Stand down! Don't provoke them!" The Iron Men stopped precisely 5 meters from the outer barricades, forming a half circle. Their shoulders aligned with geometric precision. No weapons were raised, no lights glowed. For a moment, it felt like a kind of ceasefire. And then, one of them moved forward. It approached the main communications tower on the northeast edge of the compound. With calm, deliberate motion, it extended an arm, longer than human, ending in 3 split-digit manipulators. It reached out and touched the base of the parabolic antenna dish. That's when the dish rotated, by itself, spinning fast, realigning not to any geostationary satellite, but toward the western desert, toward the site of the impact. The comms array lit up with static and then began cycling through unknown frequencies, UHF, VHF, then downward into bands no earthbound hardware normally used. The signal was sharp, encoded, and terrifyingly clean. A data stream, not a voice. Benson watched it in stunned silence, then muttered, "It's a handshake. Something down there is answering." What happened next dismantled any remaining notion that humanity was still in control. The signal burst, raw and blinding in the monitor's display, triggered an immediate reaction across the camp's defensive systems. EMP shielding overloaded. Radios failed. Every diesel engine sputtered and died. Solar battery units shut down as if they'd been commanded off by remote signal. Even my truck, which had been parked under a reflective tarp, refused to turn over. Then, from the eastern slope of the mountain, a crack opened. It wasn't an earthquake fissure or a landslide. It was engineered. The rock split along precise fault lines in a hexagonal pattern, revealing a long corridor descending into the earth, framed by smooth metallic walls that shimmered faintly with power. One of the Iron Men turned and walked toward it. Another followed. Benson staggered backward. "This isn't a tomb, it's a door." Alyssa was already moving, dragging Dr. Reza toward the lab dome to retrieve equipment. She had guessed long before any of us. The virus, the mutation, the strange electromagnetic emissions from the infected. They were byproducts of something not designed to infect us, but to signal something else. The infected were broadcasting beacons, not to call down help from the sky, but to wake whatever lay below. And the Iron Men were not invaders. They were wardens. We gathered what gear we could salvage. Backup lights, unshielded tablets, anything with analog operation. A group of us, 12 in total, including Benson, Alyssa, myself, and a pair of Space Force personnel, descended into the exposed passageway before it could seal again. The Iron Men did not block our path. In fact, one of them stepped aside as if granting permission. Inside, the walls were impossibly smooth. No tool marks, no seams. The corridor angled down for nearly 400 feet, lit intermittently by soft pulses of light embedded in the material itself. There were no wires, no heat, just a sterile hum that echoed in our bones. Rounding the final corner, we entered a chamber larger than any man-made structure I had ever seen. A perfect sphere, at least 200 meters in diameter, with a single black spire suspended in the center by what looked like electromagnetic levitation. The spire rotated slowly, and as it did, the same oscillating tone we had heard days earlier filled the air. It was not noise, it was language. Dr. Benson moved toward a raised platform with concentric rings, placing a hand on the surface. As he made contact, the spire flared to life, projecting a three-dimensional latticework of light into the air above us. It wasn't just a map, it was a simulation. It showed Earth. Then it showed Earth millions of years ago, tectonic plates rearranging, climates shifting, magnetic poles flipping, and throughout the timeline, small pulses emanated from certain regions, marked with the same waveform we had seen on the SETI logs. Africa, Antarctica, Siberia, the Four Corners. "This isn't the first time," Benson whispered. Whatever this is, it's happened before." The simulation zoomed in on the Basin and Range province, right where we were standing. An underground structure, dormant, was shown receiving energy from above, waking up, releasing something into the biosphere. The virus, not designed as a weapon, not engineered to spread via saliva or blood. It was a carrier signal, biological, yes, but not in origin. It was a failsafe, an ancient trigger. When the balance of surface activity, population, RF saturation, energy use reached a certain threshold, the broadcast began. Like a fire alarm sensing too much heat. The infected weren't a threat to humanity. We were a threat to whatever lay below. The Iron Men stepped into the chamber, surrounding the spire, but never touching it. Their presence caused the projection to shift, displaying a new image, an Earth-like world, barren and fractured. Then it faded into static. The implication was clear. Somewhere in their past, a civilization had ignored the signal, let it spread, let the surface heat the core, until whatever protective systems were buried beneath failed. The Iron Men had come too late to save that world. Now they were here, woken not by the infected, but by us. I remember feeling sick to my stomach, not from fear, but from the recognition that we had always been tenants on a property we didn't understand. The Iron Men were not our enemies. They weren't here to conquer. They were here to make sure we didn't make the same mistake twice. Alyssa leaned over the platform. Her fingers traced one of the data streams pulsing upward through the floor. "If we can find the source," she said, "we can stop the emissions, or reprogram them. Tell it that the danger's past." Benson hesitated. "That may not be our decision to make anymore." Behind us, one of the soldiers, Corporal Hennessy, spoke for the first time since entering the chamber. "We're not shutting this down, are we?" None of us answered. Not directly. We didn't need to. The question wasn't whether we could. It was whether we deserved to. We returned to the surface hours later. The sky above was bruised with dust, the sun faint behind a curtain of particles thrown up by the impact. But the camp still stood. The infected had not come. The signal had quieted. The Iron Men had not destroyed anything. Instead, they remained on the plateau, watching the sky again. It would take weeks to decipher all the data collected in the chamber below. Months, maybe, to understand the full consequences of what we had unearthed. But the message was clear. The infection was never random. It was never an accident. It was a measure of last resort. The Iron Men were not our saviors. They were our final warning. As I write this, sitting under the flickering light of the old telescope dome, I can still hear the low hum of the spire deep below, still feel its resonance in the bedrock. The world above may yet recover, cities rebuilt, systems restored, but we will never go back to ignorance, never go back to believing we were alone or untouchable. Because we aren't. We are being watched, and now we know that long before we ever built our first tower or launched our first signal into space, something else laid down roots in the dark, something powerful enough to measure civilizations and silent enough to let them destroy themselves if they failed the test. The Iron Men did not come to stop the apocalypse. They came to see if we were worth saving from ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, we still are. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.